Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we plunge into fascinating topics and extract the insights that truly matter for you. Today, we're dissecting the ideas of a philosopher who made a statement so profoundly radical, it essentially rewrote the rules of reality for everyone who came after him. We're talking about Parmenides of Elea, a thinker so unmoved by conventional wisdom that he argued change, motion, and even the existence of multiple things are all just, well, impossible illusions.
That's right. He's often called the unmoved thinker for a very good reason. His conclusions were shocking back then, and honestly, even today, they still challenge our fundamental intuitions about the world we live in.
So our mission in this deep dive is to really unpack his incredibly bold philosophy. We'll explore the vibrant intellectual world that shaped him, delve into the precise, almost startling logic of his singular poem.
Just that one poem, yeah.
Exactly. And then we'll meticulously trace his profound and enduring impact on Western thought, showing you exactly why his questions are still debated in philosophy departments today. Consider this your fast track to understanding one of those most foundational shifts in philosophical thought, bringing clarity to concepts that continue to shape how we think about the very nature of what is. So let's begin by setting the scene for this revolutionary thinker. Where exactly did Parmenides come from?
Right. He hailed from Elea. It's a Greek colonial city located in southern Italy, known today as Velia. It was established around, say, 535 BCE by Ionian Greek refugees.
Okay, so refugees founding a city. That must have made Elea a truly vibrant intellectual crossroads, didn't it? A place where different ideas were meeting.
Absolutely. It was a place where two major philosophical currents were colliding, really. On one side, you had the Ionian tradition. They were deeply focused on physiologia, which is, essentially natural philosophy.
Right, like Thales and Anaximander, looking for the basic stuff of the universe.
Precisely. Seeking material principles, a single underlying substance for everything you see, mostly through observation.
And the other current.
That was the Pythagorean school, centered over in Croton.
Right.
They introduced a much more mystical, formalist worldview. They emphasized number as a fundamental principle of reality, and crucially introduced these dualistic oppositions, light, dark, hot, cold, that sort of thing.
Okay, so you've got observation-based Ionians and number-based Pythagoreans. Where does Parmenides fit?
Well, what's truly fascinating here is how Parmenides' thought isn't just an extension of these, it's actually a profound critique of both.
A critique. How so?
He explicitly rejected the Ionian reliance on sense perception, what you see and hear, but he also refuted the Pythagorean idea of reality being constructed from discrete units with, a void or empty space in between.
So he wasn't buying either approach entirely.
Not at all. His strict monism, the idea that reality is just one single unified whole, was truly forged in this kind of intellectual pressure cooker. He took bits, maybe, but ultimately rejected their core methods.
It gets even more intriguing when you look at the details of his life or what little we know. Even his precise birth date is up for debate, right?
Yeah, that's a classic scholarly problem.
Yeah.
Ancient sources give us two conflicting timelines. You've got Diogenes Laertius, for instance, suggesting he was born around 540 BCE.
Which would make him a contemporary of Pythagoras and Xenophanes. And Heraclitus, too.
Exactly, puts him right in that early mix. But then you have Plato in his Parmenides dialogue, depicting a 65-year-old Parmenides meeting a young Socrates around 450 BCE.
Which pushes his birth date later, closer to 515 BCE.
Right, and modern scholarship actually tends to lean towards Plato's dating. It positions Parmenides' work as a direct, maybe even immediate response to the more developed Ionian physics of his time.
Interesting. But what's not debated, though, is his social standing.
No, that seems pretty clear. Born into a wealthy family, deeply respected in Elea, he's even credited with drafting the city's law code, which was apparently highly esteemed. It even gave rise to that proverb, a Parmenidean life, meaning a solid, well-ordered life.
Which raises a really interesting point, almost a paradox, doesn't it?
It really does.
How could a man whose philosophy basically denied multiplicity, denied motion, denied change, it denied the world as we perceive it, how could he also be an active legislator, dealing with citizens, laws, actions, all things that seem to require change and plurality?
That's the puzzle. And the way to understand this Parmenidean life, most likely, lies in his own distinction within the poem. He talks about the Aletheia, the way of truth.
Which is the pure logical truth about being.
Exactly. And then there's the Doxa, the way of opinion, which maps onto practical human affairs, the world of appearances.
So it's like his philosophy provided the deep metaphysical foundation, the ultimate truth.
The bedrock reality.
Well, the Doxa offered the necessary, maybe deceptive framework, as he calls it, for just navigating the everyday world, where laws and action are not only possible, but actually necessary for human life.
That seems to be the most coherent reading.
Hmm.
The Doxa explains the world we seem to live in, even if the Aletheia tells us that seeming is ultimately mistaken.
So if we take a step back, what was Parmenides actually doing with the ideas he inherited? You said he critiqued them.
Right. He wasn't just standing on the shoulders of giants. He was almost turning their own methods against them. A critical synthesizer, maybe?
Okay, give me an example. Xenophanes is often called his teacher.
Yeah. Xenophanes developed this kind of theological monarism, one supreme God, unlike the Olympian pantheon. Parmenides seems to take that idea of one, but he strips away all the divine personality, the anthropomorphism.
Makes it purely logical.
Exactly. Strictly logical and metaphysical. The one in Parmenides' system isn't really a god anymore. It's a logical necessity, deduced from reason. Its attributes aren't revealed, they're proven. It's a total conceptual transformation.
What about the Pythagoreans? You mentioned influence there, too.
Well, you can see echoes. The poem's allegorical journey, the chariot, the goddess, that has a mystical feel, perhaps Pythagorean. And the Doxa, the way of opinion, is built around this dualism of light and night, which sounds very Pythagorean. But the absolute core of his philosophy, the Aletheia, the way of truth, is profoundly anti-Pythagorean.
How so?
Because the Aletheia argues for a continuous plenum, a solid, undifferentiated, indivisible whole. That directly contradicts the Pythagorean worldview of reality being made up of discrete units, like numbers separated by a void or empty space.
So no empty space in Parmenides' reality.
None whatsoever. It's all full. In fact, you could almost read his Doxa, with its light-night cosmology, as a kind of imitative critique of Pythagorean dualism, showing how even setting up these opposed realities still falls short of describing true being.
And the Ionians. He used their title On Nature.
He did. He adopted their literary form, the cosmological poem, but only, it seems, to completely dismantle their very foundations.
By arguing.
By arguing that any changing world, any world with coming to be and passing away, fundamentally relies on the incoherent and utterly unthinkable concept of what is not, nothingness.
Which he says you can't even think about.
Exactly. So he takes their tools, rational argument, cosmology, and uses them to show that their entire project, describing a changing natural world, is built on an impossible foundation. It's quite subversive.
Okay, now let's finally dive into the very heart of his thought, his singular philosophical poem On Nature. We only have fragments, right? About 160 of them.
That's right. Preserved mostly by later commentators like Simplicius. But what we have is incredibly dense and powerful.
And it famously begins with this powerful allegorical journey. Tell us about that.
Yeah, the proem. The narrator is a youth, a choros, who's taken on this extraordinary journey in a chariot pulled by mares.
Intelligent mares, apparently.
Indeed. Guided by the Hylides, the daughters of the sun, they travel from the house of night, this realm of darkness or ignorance, all the way to these cosmic gates of the paths of night and day.
Guarded by justice. The key.
Yes, the key. Who holds the keys? She has to be persuaded to let him pass. Once through, a goddess welcomes him.
And what does she tell him?
She declares that he must learn two things. First, the unshaken heart of well-rounded truth, Aletheia's eukukleos atrevis odor. The real deal.
Okay.
And second, he must also learn the opinions of mortals, in which there is no true assurance. Doxas de brochen hesu kinepistis aluthius. Basically, how humans mistakenly see the world.
So truth and illusion right from the start.
Absolutely. And this proem, this introduction, is absolutely crucial. It's far more than just poetic window dressing.
Why is it so important?
Because the goddess explicitly instructs the youth, the narrator, to set aside the testimony of his senses. She calls him the unseeing eye and echoing ear.
Don't trust what you see or hear.
Exactly. Instead, she tells him to judge by reason, crine de luci. Use logic alone.
Ah, so this establishes the whole method, reason over senses.
Precisely. It establishes the epistemological supremacy, the superiority in terms of knowledge of a priori reason, pure thought, over empirical observation. And that shift is what justifies, in his view, the incredibly shocking conclusions about reality that are about to follow in the poem.
Okay, prepare yourself, because this is where Parmenides' logic truly starts to bend our minds a bit. The way of truth, the Aletheia.
Right. The goddess presents basically two, and only two, possible paths for thought.
What are they?
Path one. That it is and that it is not possible for it not to be. This is the path of truth, the path of persuasion. It focuses on what is.
Okay, that sounds reasonable enough. What's path 2?
Path 2. That it is not and that it is necessary for it not to be. This path focuses on what is not, and the goddess immediately dismisses this path.
Why?
She calls it a trail devoid of all knowledge, totally unlearnable. Because for Parmenides, what is not absolute non-existence is fundamentally unknowable and utterly inexpressible. You can't think it, you can't speak it.
So forget about nothingness. It's off the table.
Completely. He even criticizes a kind of third illegitimate path, which he says confused two-headed mortals. They try to mix being with not being, allowing for things to change, to come into being and pass away. He sees that as hopelessly muddled.
So the only valid path is the first one.
Yes. It is and cannot not be. From that single, absolutely unshakable premise that what is not is unthinkable and cannot exist. The goddess then logically deducts all the characteristics, what she calls the signs or somata of this what is to eon.
Okay, so what are these signs? This is laid out in fragment B8, right?
Yes, the longest and most crucial fragment. First, what is must be ungenerated and indestructible.
Why?
Because where could it come from? It couldn't come from nothing, what is not, because that doesn't exist. And it couldn't come from something that already is, because then it would be coming to be, it would just be, so no beginning.
And no end for the same reason. It can't pass into nothingness.
Exactly. As he puts it, coming to be is extinguished and destruction is unheard of. It just is eternally.
Okay, ungenerated, indestructible. What else?
Second, it must be whole, unique, continuous, and indivisible.
Unpack that. Whole and unique seem clear, just one thing. But continuous and indivisible.
It means there can be no gaps, no empty space, no void within it. If there were empty space, what is not, separating parts, then it wouldn't be truly one, it would be many. So it must be a complete homogeneous plenum, a solid, undifferentiated block all the way through.
Like a featureless solid.
In a way, yes. No parts to distinguish.
And perhaps the most striking attributes.
Right. Third, it must be unchanging and motionless.
Because?
Well, think about it. If what is changed, it would have to become something it formerly was not. But what is not is impossible. So change is impossible.
And motion?
Motion would require it to move from one place to another. But to move, there would need to be empty space, what is not, for it to move into. Since there's no empty space, no void.
No motion is possible.
Precisely. It remains the same and in the same place, held rigidly, as he says, by mighty necessity. There's simply no logical room for it to deviate or move.
This relentless logic culminates in his famous simile, doesn't it? That what is like the bulk of a well-rounded sphere, eukuklios spheros and elinkion non chi.
Yes, that's the image he leaves us with.
Now, there's been a lot of debate about that. Is he saying reality is literally a giant physical ball?
That's one interpretation, and maybe some earlier readers thought that. But the dominant modern view, and I think the more plausible one, is that the sphere is a powerful metaphor.
A metaphor for what?
For the logical and conceptual properties of being that he just deduced. Think about a perfect sphere. It's complete, it's uniform in all directions from the center, it's finite but perfectly contained. It has no beginning or end point on its surface.
So it represents perfection, completeness, uniformity, self-consistency.
Exactly. On this reading, Parmenides isn't describing a physical object you could somehow, stub your toe on. He's describing the abstract, perfect, unchanging structure of reality itself, a reality that is fundamentally conceptual, logical, not material in the way we usually think of it.
Okay, so we have this picture of reality from the way of truth. One, eternal, unchanging, motionless, continuous, perfect being. But then there's the second part of the poem, the way of opinion, the doxa.
Right, which is a fascinating puzzle.
Why does he even include it? After laying out such an uncompromising logic about true being, why does Parmenides then meticulously describe the world of appearances, the world of change and multiplicity? The goddess herself calls this section deceptive, apatalos.
She does. She explicitly warns the reader.
Yeah.
She says the fundamental error mortals make is that they name two forms, light and night, and treat them as fundamental opposed realities. That's the basic mistake that generates the illusory world.
And yet, despite calling it deceptive, Parmenides constructs a really detailed physical theory in the Doxa, doesn't he? Like cosmology, biology. Some views even seem scientifically advanced for his time.
He does. He talks about the structure of the cosmos, the nature of the sun and moon, correctly identifying that the moon gets its light from the sun, theories about human reproduction, even about thought itself.
So why? Why build this elaborate, detailed, yet ultimately false cosmology? This is the etiological problem, right? What's the point?
Exactly. Why explain the origins of world you've just argued doesn't truly exist? The most compelling explanation, I think, connects it to human cognition, how our minds work.
How so?
Well, there's another fragment, B16, which seems to suggest that human thought itself is physiological. It's determined by the mixture of these opposites, light, dark, hot, cold, etc., within our bodies.
So our very way of thinking is tied to these apparent opposites.
It seems so. Which implies that mortals are, in a sense, constitutionally bound to perceive the world dualistically, to see these opposites and the changes they seem to cause. We can't help but see the world this way through our senses and our mixed nature.
So the doxa isn't just dismissing mortal opinions, it's explaining why we have them.
Precisely. It masterfully bridges the gap between the austere, unified reality of pure being described in the Aletheia and our everyday lived experience. It explains why the world of the senses seems so compelling, so real to us, even if, at its ultimate foundation, it's based on a profound logical falsehood, the acceptance of what is not. It's the best possible account of the apparent world, given that it is only appearance.
That makes sense. It's like saying, okay, this is the real truth, but here's the best explanation for the illusion you're all caught up in.
Something like that, yes.
Okay, so Parmenides didn't just propose a philosophy, he basically threw down a gauntlet. He reset the entire agenda for every philosopher who came after him.
Absolutely. He created such an undeniable logical challenge that everyone else had to find a way to respond, to grapple with his seemingly impossible conclusions.
So how did they do that? Let's start with his immediate intellectual successors, the Eleatic school.
Right. His most famous student or follower was Zeno of Elea.
Zeno of the paradoxes, Achilles and the tortoise.
That's the one. Zeno famously employed a dialectical aporetic method. That means he didn't offer many positive arguments for Parmenides' view. Instead, he developed these brilliant paradoxes.
The dichotomy, the arrow.
Exactly. All designed to show that our common sense beliefs that things are plural, that motion is real, actually lead to inescapable logical contradictions if you analyze them closely. He used reductio ad absurdum.
Show the alternative is absurd to make the original seem less so.
Precisely. He tried to make his master's shocking conclusions seem more plausible by exposing how utterly incoherent the alternatives the world of common sense really were when subjected to strict logic.
Okay, Zeno defends by attacking the opposition. Who else was in the Eleatic school?
There was also Melissus of Samos. He took a different approach, more systematic, more constructive. He tried to fortify Parmenides' arguments directly.
Did he add anything new?
He did, actually, with a significant modification. Melissus argued that being Parmenides one must be spatially and temporally infinite.
Infinite. Parmenides described it as finite, like a sphere.
Right. Melissus reasoned that if being were limited, it would have to be limited by something else. But what could limit it? Only what is not, the void. Since the void is impossible, being cannot be limited. Therefore, it must be infinite in extent and duration.
Interesting. So even within the school defending Parmenides, there was immediate tension and evolution of the ideas.
Definitely. It shows how potent and problematic Parmenides' initial arguments were.
Okay, so after the Eleatics, who tried to defend the master, what was the next wave of response?
Then we see a whole generation of thinkers, often grouped together as the Pluralists, people like Empedocles and Anaxagoras.
And what was their goal?
They broadly accepted Parmenides' central premise. You can't get something from absolutely nothing, and true being can't just vanish into nothing. Creation and destruction in the absolute sense are impossible.
Okay, so they accept that part of the logic.
Yes, but their primary goal was different from the Eleatics. They wanted to save the phenomena.
Save the appearances. Make sense of the changing world we see.
Exactly. They wanted to reconcile Parmenides' unyielding logic about eternal being with the undeniable reality of change, motion, and multiplicity that we experience every single day. How can both be true?
So how did Empedocles try to do this?
Empedocles of Arragas proposed that reality wasn't just one thing, but was made of four eternal, unchanging material roots: rhizomata, earth, air, fire, and water.
The four classic elements.
Right. These roots themselves never come into being or pass away. They are eternal, like Parmenidean being. But, he argued, they can mix together and separate from each other.
So change is just rearrangement.
Precisely. Change is the mixing and separating of these eternal roots, driven by two cosmic forces: love, philotos, which brings things together, and strife, nikos, which pulls them apart. So you get apparent generation and destruction, but the underlying roots remain.
Clever. What about Anaxagoras, a different approach?
A different flavor of pluralism, yes. Anaxagoras of Clazomena went even further. He posited not just 4 elements, but an infinite number of fundamental substances or seed spermata.
Infinite types of stuff.
Essentially, yes. And he had this famous, rather cryptic saying, in everything, there is a portion of everything.
Meaning
That every object we see contains tiny bits of all possible substances, but it appears as, say, bread, because the seeds of bread predominate. Change, then, for Anaxagoras was the separation and recombination of these infinitely varied eternal seeds.
And what caused the seeds to combine or separate? Did he have forces like love and strife?
Not exactly forces, but an ordering principle. He introduced nous, usually translated as mind or intellect. Nous is this external, non-material principle that initiated the cosmic vortex, causing the initial mixture of seeds to start separating out and forming the structured world we see. It's the intelligence that brings order.
So both Empedocles and Anaxagoras keep eternal stuff, but explain change through mixing and separation, driven by either forces or mind.
That's the core idea. They accept Parmenides' ban on absolute creation destruction, but find a way to allow for relative change.
But perhaps the most audacious response to Parmenides came from the Atomists, right? Leucippus and Democritus.
Oh, absolutely. Theirs was arguably the most direct confrontation with Parmenides, while also, strangely, building on his idea of being.
How did they manage that?
They posited that the fundamental reality is composed of an infinite number of tiny, indivisible units they called atoms, atoma, meaning uncuttables.
Okay, atoms.
Now think about the properties of these atoms. Each individual atom, for Leucippus and Democritus, essentially possessed the core attributes of Parmenidean being.
Really? How so?
Each atom was ungenerated, indestructible, solid, homogeneous, indivisible, and unchanging in its own nature. They were like tiny little Parmenidean ones.
So far, so Parmenidean, but that doesn't explain change or plurality.
Exactly. That's where their truly revolutionary move came in. They directly defied Parmenides on his most fundamental point. They reintroduced what is not.
They brought back nothingness, but Parmenides said that was unthinkable.
They did, but they gave it a name and a function. They argued for the existence of the void kinin. And quite controversially, they explicitly identified this void with what is not.
So they basically said, sorry, Parmenides, what is not does exist, and it's empty space.
That's pretty much it. For them, this void, this empty space, was absolutely necessary. It was necessary for plurality, allowing the infinite atoms to exist as separate entities, and it was necessary for motion, giving the atom space to move around, collide, and combine.
So atoms being move in the void, not being, to create the world we see.
That's the atomist picture. Change is just the rearrangement of eternal atoms in the void. If we connect this back to the bigger picture, you see how Parmenides' profound challenge forced all these subsequent physicists, pluralists, and atomists alike to develop much more sophisticated, often two-tiered theories of reality.
Yeah, they all had to posit some kind of unchanging fundamental level.
Whether it's roots, seeds, or atoms.
And then explain how the derivative phenomenal world of change and multiplicity arises from that fundamental level. It was a complete paradigm shift, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Physics, cosmology. They could never go back to the simpler Ionian models after Parmenides laid down his logical challenge.
Now, Parmenides' influence extends even further, maybe most famously reflected in Plato.
Oh, immensely. You can argue Plato is wrestling with Parmenides his entire career.
How does it show up? Plato's theory of forms seems relevant here.
Absolutely central. Think about the forms. They are eternal, unchanging, indivisible, non-sensible entities that constitute true reality. That sounds incredibly similar to the properties of Parmenides I, doesn't it?
It really does. And Plato's big distinction between the intelligible realm of forms, the realm of true knowledge accessed by reason, and the sensible realm of appearances, the changing world we perceive, seems to directly mirror Parmenides' way of truth versus the way of opinion.
It's a very close parallel. Plato essentially takes the Parmenidean description of being and applies it to his forms. But there was a big problem.
What was that?
Parmenides argued reality is one. Plato wanted many forms, the form of justice, the form of beauty, the form of bed, etc. But how could there be many distinct forms without implicitly involving not being to differentiate them? How is the form of justice not the form of beauty? Doesn't that require acknowledging not being in some sense?
The old Parmenidean problem comes back to despite Plato's own theory.
Exactly. And Plato was acutely aware of this. He even staged a devastating critique of his own early theory of forms in his dialogue titled Parmenides.
Where the character of Parmenides basically tears apart the young Socrates' ideas about forms.
Precisely. He uses the character of Parmenides, the master logician, to expose all sorts of logical paradoxes in the theory, including the famous third man argument, which highlights a potential infinite regress when you try to explain how particular things participate in a form.
So Plato uses Parmenides to critique himself. What was his solution then?
His mature response comes later, particularly in the dialogue called the Sophist. This dialogue is often described as Plato committing a symbolic parricide against Parmenides.
Killing the father figure. Strong stuff.
It signifies a necessary break. Plato argues that philosophy, in order to account for the world, especially for language, thought, and crucially, falsehood, how we can say something that is not true, philosophy, must dare to say that what is not in some sense is.
He has to allow not being back in. Didn't the Atomists already do that with the void?
Yes, but Plato does it differently, more subtly. He reinterprets not being, not as absolute non-existence like the void, but as difference or otherness.
How does that work?
When we say a man is not a horse, Plato argues, we aren't saying a man doesn't exist.
Yeah.
We're simply saying a man is different from a horse. Not being in this sense just means being different from.
Okay, I see. It's relational.
Exactly. This redefinition allowed Plato to have a plurality of forms. Each form is itself but is not, i.e. is different from every other form. It allows for a complex, relational reality where things can be distinct without invoking absolute non-existence, thereby sidestepping Parmenides' original prohibition while still acknowledging his influence.
Clever. But it feels like we're still looking for a really satisfying account of change. Plato deals with plurality, but the changing world of appearances.
Right, and for that, we really need to turn to Aristotle, Plato's most famous student. It was Aristotle who finally offered what became the definitive ancient solution to the problem of change that Parmenides had so powerfully posed.
How did Aristotle tackle it?
Aristotle argued that the whole Parmenidean dilemma that change must come from either being impossible, it already is, or non-being impossible, nothing comes from nothing, was basically a false dichotomy. He thought it was rooted in an oversimplified understanding of what being actually means.
An oversimplified ontology.
Yes. Parmenides treated being as just one thing, actual present existence. Aristotle's brilliant solution was to introduce a crucial distinction within being itself, the distinction between potentiality, or dunamis, and actuality, or energia.
Potentiality and actuality, how does that help?
For Aristotle, change isn't something popping into existence from absolute non-existence, nor is it something already actual becoming actual. Instead, change is simply a potentiality being actualized.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about an acorn. An acorn is actually an acorn right now, but it is potentially an oak tree. It's not actually an oak tree, but the potential is real. It's part of its being. Change growth is the process of that potential oak tree becoming an actual oak tree.
Or an unmusical person is actually unmusical, but potentially musical.
Exactly. Or a block of marble is actually a block, but potentially a statue. The potentiality is real. Change is the realization of that pre-existing potential.
So change doesn't come from what is not, it comes from what is potentially.
Precisely. And he clarified this further by outlining 3 principles needed for any change. You need an underlying subject that persists through the change. For example, the person, the marble, a form that is acquired, musicality, the statue shape, and the privation or the initial absence of that form.
So the genius was enriching the concept of being.
Absolutely. Aristotle showed that being isn't monolithic, as Parmenides seemed to assume. A thing can be, in actuality, in one respect, while also being, in potentiality, in another respect. This introduces a crucial third-term potential being that elegantly dissolves the Parmenidean dilemma.
Because change is now a transformation within the realm of being, just moving from potential to actual.
Exactly. It's not a leap across the abyss from non-being to being, or some impossible transformation of pure actuality. This incredibly powerful solution, potentiality and actuality, went on to dominate Western philosophical and scientific thought for nearly 2 millennia. It was the way to understand change for a very long time.
Okay, so after this incredible intellectual journey, wrestling with being, not being, change, permanence, what does all of this mean for you, listening now as you try to make sense of your own reality?
Well, Parmenides' legacy is truly monumental. You really can't overstate his importance.
He's often called the founder of ontology, right?
He is, and rightly so. He fundamentally shifted philosophy towards the question of what it means to be, Before him, thinkers were mostly asking, what is the world made of? He asked, what does it even mean to be anything at all?
And his method was revolutionary, too.
Absolutely. He pioneered rigorous, deductive, a priori argumentation, arguments based purely on logical reasoning, not sense experience. He set a completely new standard for philosophical justification. You couldn't just assert things anymore. You had to prove them logically from first principles.
And that stark line he drew, reality versus appearance, reason versus the senses.
That established a canonical philosophical opposition, maybe the central tension, that has preoccupied virtually all subsequent Western philosophy, most obviously Plato, but really everyone. How does the world revealed by reason relate to the world perceived by our senses?
So is he just a historical figure then, or is there still relevance today?
Oh, the profound challenge that Parmenides first articulated has absolutely not diminished with time. His fragmentary poem is still a subject of intense scholarly debate. Interpretations continue to evolve.
And the core questions.
The fundamental questions he was the first to really wrestle with in such a stark way. The relationship between our thought, our language, and reality itself. The nature of time versus eternity. The incredibly tricky problem of negation. How not works. The very possibility of change. These remain right at the heart of contemporary discussions in metaphysics, in logic, in the philosophy of language.
So he's not just some dusty ancient Greek figure.
Not at all. His uncompromising logic, even if you ultimately disagree with his conclusions, continues to serve as this powerful testament to the revolutionary potential of pure reason. Parmenides compels every new generation of thinkers, including us today, to confront that most basic, most fundamental question of all: what is?